Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Horizons of Spirit Island from Greater Than Games. Horizons of Spirit Island is this is the Target version of Spirit Island. I don't know if it's a Target exclusive or currently available on Target. This is the more accessible version of Spirit Island, although this review is going to be talking about a few different things depending on who you are. You see, this is a more accessible version of Spirit Island, and we'll be talking about both what this game is, where it compromises, who the target audience is, whether you are someone who's just found this at Target and found this video, in which case, welcome aboard. Hope you enjoy, and I hope I can guide you along the way, or whether you're someone who has played a whole bunch of the other Spirit Island content and just want to know what's going on here. So first of all, this is not going to be a full review of the full Spirit Island experience. I'll throw a link down below to it, or maybe a link up here, or one of those things, but I have already reviewed the full game of Spirit Island, not the expansions yet, but the full game of Spirit Island. This is the Target, or like I said, the more accessible version of it. This is going to retail for cheaper. It's currently, I believe, $34.99 at Target, giving you maybe, I don't know, 70% of the price or whatever it is. Spirit Island can generally be found for somewhere in the range of $45 to $60, depending on where you're getting it from. So this already is cheaper, and that's going to affect both the content, the components, some of the gameplay aspects. Not to a large degree, though. The gameplay is 99% the same, or 100% the same, just really giving you the same core gameplay experience. So let's go ahead and dive into it, and timestamps down below to any relevant section. Off the bat, as far as what Spirit Island is a cooperative experience. If you're new to this genre, that basically means it's you against the game. You are playing against the game no differently than if you were playing a game of solitaire with a bunch of cards trying to go against the win condition of the experience. This is going to be far more intricate than solitaire, though. This is a game you can play solo. You can play completely yourself against the game until you win or lose, or you can play it cooperatively with up to 3 players, or 3 players including yourself for this particular version of the game, in which you are all working together, playing as these spirits in order to take down, or in order to protect the island from the various invaders. Basically, you're trying not to get overwhelmed in the game. This is going to be a cooperative game using the standard cooperative fare, in the sense that you're alternating between you doing things to preserve the game state or to improve the game state as much as possible, or to achieve your win condition. Meanwhile, after you take your turn, or between your turns, the way Spirit Island does so, you're going to have the enemies, the invaders, taking their turns as they ravage, build, and invade the island. You're trying to keep the game state as favorable to yourself as possible. They're trying to deteriorate the game state, and the way you combine your powers and your abilities and the way you work together is going to define your winning or losing. To that end, every single round you're going to be looking at these cards over here, and the enemies are going to be ravaging, building, and then exploring. What that means is all these tokens, these little guys, these buildings, and these larger buildings over here are basically going to represent a danger to the island, while you navigate the Dahan. The Dahan are your allies to an extent, and then you have the Blight, which is one of the ways you're going to lose, is if as the enemies strike the land, Blight is going to be spread onto the land, and if you run out of Blight, you will lose the game. That's one of a few ways you can lose over here, but the main way for the most part. Past that, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take your turns utilizing your hand of power cards. You see, you're going to have these 5 core spirits over here, each of these spirits representing a different way that the game state is going to be handled, their own abilities, their own starting 4 cards, their own way their tableau upgrades, and the growth powers you have over here. Each of these spirits, you're going to be utilizing these in order to figure out how you can repel the invaders, how you can deal damage, strike fear into their hearts, try to manage and navigate the game flow so that Blight is not constantly running out. You want to try to move things around the board and just scare them and destroy them, which will generate fear into your enemies, hopefully giving you fear cards that will help you along the way. You're trying to manage all this flow because the enemies are going to be ravaging every single turn, but driven by this deck of cards over here. Right now, the enemies are ravaging on the wetlands over here. So you're going to be looking at these zones that have enemies. These 2 seem safe. There's no enemies over here. These 3 represent a danger, although this one over here is not that much of a danger because they only really do a lot of damage. They only really represent a strong threat if they're dealing 2 damage or more, and a single solitary enemy unit of just this little one over here won't deal enough to you. So I'm kind of looking at this over here, trying to figure out how myself with my teammates, how we can manage these 2 spots over here. You can generally do that by either striking damage to enemies, taking them out. You can do that through defend powers, where you put defense down onto the land, preventing them from dealing damage. You can do that by moving them and shuffling them around the board in different ways. You're trying to figure out your access to your powers to prevent bad things happening. If you succeed, great. If you fail, well, then you're going to have Blight struck into the land, and possibly having some of the player sanctuaries, which are these tokens over here. If you have sanctuaries on the spot when Blight hits, well, that's not going to be great for you either. So you're trying to navigate all that. From there, you'll move to the build phase, where you're going to look in the jungle lands, and anywhere you have enemies in the jungle lands, you're going to build. So again, we can look over here, and these are safe, but here, and here are spots that are dangerous in the sense that you're going to have buildings built. In general, you're always building whatever building isn't there, or whatever building is the most most of. So over here, we're going to try to build this one, the larger building, because there isn't one. Versus over here, you're going to build the smaller building, and if hypothetically we had a game state over here, where you had both of each, you'd always build the smaller building until there are more smaller buildings than larger buildings. But ultimately, the invaders are building. Lastly, these cars are going to shift over, and you're going to have an explore phase where we find out where they're exploring, and you're going to take these little tiles over here, these little individual spots, and they're going to explore on mountains, regions, wherever they are adjacent to either the edge of the board or other regions where there are enemies. And that's going to represent the continued cycle. As they explore, next turn they're going to be building, and the next turn they're going to be ravaging. So they're constantly representing a growing threat, a threat that you are trying to manage and take it down at its core. Meanwhile, you're dealing with a whole handful of tons of power cards. Your starting power cards from your spirits, as well as these 2 large deck of cards. We're going to have the opportunity to grab these cards, add into the tons of powers you can mess with, the ways you can try to figure out the game state of whether it's a fast or slow power. Fast powers are great because they act before the enemies, but they're also harder to deal with because of that. You're trying to plan for the future in this game a lot, so you kind of have to deal with tomorrow's problem today, as opposed to waiting to the last minute. So you're balancing the fast and slow. You're balancing how far it reaches from your sanctuaries, from your presence on the board. You're also balancing which land it targets, how you're going to combine powers and symbols, elemental symbols, so you can utilize them to drive your other spirits over there, your own internal powers there. You're trying to figure out that puzzle as you try to, well, overcome the enemy. That's what Spirit Island is at a high level. We're skipping some of the rules, we're skipping some of the elements of fear cards, we're not going into every little detail and nuance of it, but you're trying to upgrade and grow more powerful and manage the board and take down the enemies before you run out of blight or just run out of time in this game. So, Horizon Spirit Island, what does it do differently? Let's start with that before we get into the game. Horizon Spirit Island is giving you a few main differences. The first is it's going to give you a dialed down components. You're going to have more cardboard tokens than some of the plastic tokens you might be used to if you played Spirit Island. The cards seem to be equal quality. The boards, rather than having modular boards, you're going to have a single board over here, which is 2-sided for 2 and 3 players, but you can no longer have it set up for a modular situation where you can mess around the boards in different ways the way Spirit Island normally does. You're not going to have your separate fear board, which is not necessarily a bad thing there. It's just the difference between having these tiles over here. These spirit boards over here are going to be thinner than your typical Spirit Island boards. Rather than being thick punchboard, these are the flimsy little tiles, which is, some might want that might be an improvement. I've seen people who say that they prefer that, but these are going to be thinner than your typical Spirit Island boards, and that's going to be the prime differences. You just have component differences. You have a few less things going on in terms of the amount of content the game is giving you, a few things dialed down in terms of cardboard tokens instead of various miniatures or wooden pieces for the Dahan and things like that, and a singular board as opposed to modular boards. Past that, you're also going to see some differences in terms of you're going to get this nice quick start guide, which gives you a easier dive into the world of Spirit Island. Spirit Island is generally like a 30+ page rulebook, 29 pages, 30-page rulebook over here as far as the core rulebook, and this quick start guide gives you most of what you need in 9 pages as far as getting up and running. You might need to reference the rulebook, but it does make it a little easier to dive into it without being overwhelmed by 30 pages of content, which you don't need all of it, especially not off the bat. Additionally, supposedly, and this is the key word, supposedly these 5 spirits are a little easier and a little less intricate as far as diving into it. I didn't find them to be, the reason I say supposedly in that context is not that I found them to be complex. I didn't, but I didn't find them to be dumbed down either. I've played through most of these spirits by now, and I found them to be a normal Spirit Island experience. Could I argue that they're not as intricate as some? I absolutely could. Do I feel that they were dumbed down and not interesting? Not in the slightest. I think these are 5 more spirits that are worth having, worth adding to your collection, but that's pretty much the core differences as far as that. A cheaper price point, a different box size, and a lot less content. You're not really going to have much of an insert in the box, so some things are taken away, but you're getting mostly the same Spirit Island experience. As far as should you get this if you are a Spirit Island fan, well, that's going to be up to you. For me, I think the price point of $35, even just for 5 new spirits at $7 a spirit, if you're really a hardcore Spirit Island fan, I don't think it's a bad deal at all. I think it's fun to have those extra spirits. I don't know if they're, and none of these really stood out to me as like my go-to spirits that I love the way that they interact with the game state, and they definitely are more focused on the core gameplay, so if you have more of the expansions and you like integrating those spirits, there's a little less of a focus on that. I think it ultimately depends on whether you think $7 for more spirit variety is a good thing. I think it's not a bad price point, but you also have to be comfortable with the fact that these are not going to match your core Spirit Island board. It's not really a problem, but you just have to be comfortable with that aspect. Past that, is any other reason to get this? I don't think so. I don't think there's any other reason to get this as a Spirit Island fan. If you own Spirit Island, if you're a fan of the genre, I think the only reason to consider getting this would be the extra spirits and whether those are worth $7 a piece to you. Myself, I'd rather have actual content, like full-on cardboard boards to match my Spirit Island games currently. But yeah, that's the only reason I can think to get this as a Spirit Island fan. Past that, I would avoid this and stick with your regular copy of Spirit Island already. As far as if you don't have Spirit Island yet, where should you dive into it? I think that does depend on who you are and where you're coming at it from. I think if you are someone who's used to the board game hobby, if you have a lot of games already in your collection, if your shelves in any way look like the ones behind me, then I think you should probably just stick with regular Spirit Island. I think the savings on price point over here is there. It's definitely there, but I'd rather just have the full Spirit Island experience and something that can grow with me more, as opposed to what I have right now, which would be a better and easier access point, but not something that will grow with me quite as much as regular Spirit Island. So I think if your shelves look like mine, I'd probably recommend just paying the extra $15, $20 and getting the full version of Spirit Island with more content, more modularity, and more things going for it. As far as if you're someone whose shelves don't look like mine, if you wander down the aisles of Targets and you're trying to figure out whether Spirit Island is a good game for you or not, I think it is a very good experience with caveats. The biggest caveat is that the quick start guide, the compromise to the 30-page rulebook, is still a 10-page rulebook. It's still 10 pages of walking you through the experience. I think there is a payoff there. I don't know what games you're used to. I don't know if you're going from Monopoly to here, Cards Against Humanity. I don't know if you played Forbidden Island, a solid gateway cooperative experience. I don't know if you've ever even heard the words cooperative game. And so I think that the world of board gaming in general is very intricate and very vast in what it offers. And I think Spirit Island gives you a very incredibly compelling cooperative and solo experience. For myself, I spent years in the board game hobby before diving into solo games properly, and Spirit Island was my solo game. It was the game that brought me fully into solo gaming. I think there is intricacy here. I think there's a reward. I think there's a puzzle here that is enjoyable to solve, but it does come with the barrier of a mental load of both understanding how to play the game between a 10-page quick start guide and a 30-page rulebook. That's a lot of stuff. And again, I think you can read the quick start guide and start off this game. I think that's fine. I think you'll be fine. But I think you might want to reference that rulebook, and that's where 30 pages you just might find intimidating. If that scares you, this might not be the game for you. There are other gateway games I can recommend, other experiences that I think are giving you a solid approach into the world of gaming, a solid approach into the world of solo and cooperative gaming. I mentioned Forbidden Island already. I think Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert, I think they're fantastic games. I think Pandemic is an excellent cooperative game that will give you a 6-7 page rulebook for the entire experience and an easier degree of how much you're handling in your mind. But I also think it does so with less of a reward as far as how satisfying it feels to beat back the invaders, how satisfying and enjoyable it can be to take the enemies out in this game and to try to manage everything else. You won't have these scenarios and the nemesis or whatever they have in the full Spirit Island game. You won't have some of those puzzles, but you still have a very solid, enjoyable experience on this table that is worth diving into. I would say if a 10-page quick start guide hasn't yet scared you off, I think this is an enjoyable game with a lot of compelling aspects going on as you figure out how to balance the experience around you, as you figure out how to use different spirits to your advantage and beat back the invaders. To me, one of the things I've always said about Spirit Island that I find immensely compelling, and a reason I'd recommend it to you, is the fact that Spirit Island is a game where I always feel like I'm losing, even though I barely ever lose this game. And again, this doesn't have the full difficulty modifications of the full game, so there is that, but I always feel like Spirit Island is a challenge. I always feel like I have to work my spirits and try to figure out where I can push and pull and navigate and deal damage and cause fear. I'm always trying to feel how I can actually win and constantly feeling the threat of losing. And yet I often win. This is a game where the pressure is present and the loss condition is ever in front of your face, even as you actually have things in full control. I like that balance. I like feeling like I have to try, but then I do enjoy that little feeling of winning. I enjoy going through the puzzle and winning it most of the time, despite feeling like it was a challenge the entire time. Overall, I recommend Spirit Island intensely. Again, you can watch my other review. I think it's a fantastic game. The expansions only make it better, adding more intricacy to the experience and giving you more ways to experience. As far as this gateway version of Spirit Island, I don't think it dials things down that much. I think it limits components more than dials down the experience, and I do think it's a game worth checking out. In any case, and until next time, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you found this useful as far as when you're wandering the aisles of Target or whether you're a hardcore experienced gamer. This is Horizon Spirit Island. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.